All right, if you have your Bible, turn to the last chapter of the book of Acts. This is momentous, by the way. I was sharing this with my wife yesterday. When I was asked to kind of take the pulpit 3.5 years ago, we embarked, if you've been in this church for a while, on a lengthy 3.5-year study. We spent 9 months kind of sweeping through the whole Old Testament, took a little break. Then we spent 1 year and 4 months doing one of the 4 Gospels to see that section of the story with Jesus. Took a small break, and we've spent the last 9 months now looking at how God has established the church after the resurrection of Jesus. With the exception of Revelation, which is being taught upstairs, and we'll get Derek maybe 6 months to a year from now to come and do a sub-series of that down here, we'll have actually looked at the entire story by next Sunday over 3.5 years, which I think is really, really cool. And all of those sermons are online, and there are a bunch of people that have kind of come here within that last 3.5 years and have actually gone back and kind of caught back up. I know Paul Smith is one of them. You've kind of listened to most of them, haven't you? Oh, most. Thanks for making me feel good. I appreciate it. Okay, Acts chapter 28. Where are we?
Malta.
What's that? Malta. We are in Malta. That's exactly right. Another good word. You'll recall Paul gets this vision, go back to Jerusalem before I take you to Rome. He goes back to Jerusalem. It doesn't go well. He gets thrown in prison. He stays in prison for over 2 years, 2 different governors. He appeals to Caesar. They finally throw him on a ship. They cruise for a few days. He gets on another ship, which is an Egyptian grain transport ship. And they go on a couple of week trip on this ship. Just to back up for a second, Paul tells them, I think this is a bad idea. We should probably stop here, ride out the winter. They don't listen to him. Everything looks like it's going great, and all of a sudden the seas turn on them, and they have literally a 2-week shipwreck going on and on as they get blown hundreds of miles off course. Paul says, I told you once, you didn't listen. Now God is telling me to tell you, you really better listen. And they finally kind of, the light goes off, and they end up crashing into the island of Malta, which we will look at this morning. So that's kind of where we are in the story. Show that map, will you? Oh, this is beautiful. I forgot all about this. So, Amy, is Amy in here? You know, Amy with the quadruplets. She said, I'm sitting in church, and we get done with your message, and this is what my 8-year-old drew. She said, what is that? And he told her the entire sermon as he was drawing it. Now, you people can learn something. There's gonna, now I'm adding shame to the guilt so we can make sure this really feels like church. There's Paul in the middle, and he's helping with the mass, but only slightly helping, and they're throwing the grain overboard. I was so impressed with this. I said, can I take the drawing? And I just wanted to shame you. Okay, go to the next slide. There's our map. So Paul has left Jerusalem, and they sail from Sidon. They switch boats. They end up skirting around Crete. They try to tuck in Crete. They can't do it, and they blow all the way off into Malta. And what we're going to do this morning is going to be more of a review. We're going to look at the first 22 verses of the last chapter. But really what we're going to do is just look at threads that we've seen. So nothing that we're going to look at this morning, the story will be new, but the threads will not. And if you're like me, I need to hear things over and over and over and over again. And which is what this morning will feel like, unfortunately. And so they get to this island of Malta, and these people, you'll find out, these natives as they're referred to, which is a lovely English word, there's two things I notice about them, and you'll notice it very quickly. First of all, they're superstitious people. They're very superstitious. That's the word we would use. Really, what they are is they're spiritual people. In our day and age, we think if somebody talks about some other god or has some weird thought about how the universe is flowing, then they're superstitious. But really, we live in a very pagan society. It's unique. Ryan Fury always reminds me of this. It's unique to any other time in history. Something bad happened in ancient times. Everybody thought there was a god behind it. Something good happened. There was a god behind it. They always thought that way. Not in our world. In our world, it's a karma world. And what karma is a biblical concept sowing and reaping, plant corn, reap corn, right? That kind of thing. Cheat on your wife, blow up your family. That's what karma is, but we remove God from it. So when I hear karma, I think, well, that's a biblical principle. But then we take that principle, woven, it's a DNA like gravity, woven through society, and we say God has nothing to do with it. It's just the way life is. They would have never thought that. So in our words, these people will seem superstitious, but really they're spiritual people. The second thing that we'll see very quickly, and it'll run through the course of this thing, is these people on Malta who don't follow God, Jesus, the whole deal, have this incredible knack towards hospitality. And so we'll see this in the story. Luke really wants us to see it. There's this mutuality between Paul and Luke and Aristarchus and the people, these believers on this boat, and the people on the boat, and the islanders, if you will. And interestingly enough, and they stay there for months, by the way, there's no recording of any conversion that takes place on this island. It doesn't mean that nobody came to believe in Jesus on this island. What it means is Luke doesn't care about that. So Luke wants us to highlight something else. And what he wants us to see initially is just how much co-working, how much community life there is happening between the believers and the non-believers. And crazy enough, it's for everybody's benefit, which is really the first thread that I want to remind us that we've seen in Luke. This idea of partnering outside the faith. Listen to what it says. Is there any more light on this, David? Or are we all the way up?
That's all the way.
I'm blind to that. Listen to what it says, what Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 2. Beloved, I urge you, as aliens and strangers, to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles. So he's telling them, I want you to watch how you live for people that aren't following God. So that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. Submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king or one in authority or in the government, as seen by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men, but don't use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, meaning you're believers and the followers of Jesus. Be tight with them, but also fear God and honor the king. Isn't that a cool description? You know, it's the idea that we partner within the community. You get to know your neighbor, right? You don't just go in and close the garage door. It means you hang out with the people from lacrosse and Little League and basketball. It means you get involved in, what's that science project thing, kids? Odyssey of the mind. It doesn't matter what it is. And then realize when you're partnering with people that don't follow Jesus, they're watching. So live well, love well, and partner. We see the same kind of precarious statement that Jeremiah made. You'll recall after the civil war and the split in Israel, Israel gets annihilated by Assyria. Judah is still in existence in the south. And finally Babylon sweeps them off because the people of Judea no longer would follow God. And Jeremiah the prophet is asked by God to speak to these people in exile. This is what God says through Jeremiah. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses, live in them, plant gardens, and eat their produce. Take wives, become the fathers of sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, and multiply there, and do not decrease. Seek the welfare of that city. Hear what he's saying. When I take my hand of protection on you because you fail to walk with me, and let you for a period of time find out what it's like to not walk with me, and I move you off into Babylon, this is what you do. Seek the welfare of that city, the people that conquered you and carried you away, where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will have welfare. Isn't that a beautiful picture? So often, we as believers think, oh, I don't want to get polluted by the world, so we withdraw so far. This is not what Jesus did. Jesus was okay letting the dirt of society get all over his clothes on behalf of community and on behalf of love. Let's begin reading our text this morning. Chapter 8, 28, verse 1. If you don't have a Bible, there's some Bibles in the chairs. When they had been brought safely through, then we found out that the island was called Malta. Malta is roughly 18 miles wide, long by 18 miles wide. It's roughly 58 miles from Sicily. So they're close to Sicily, but they can't get there. Verse 2. The natives, that's a great word in English, showed us extraordinary kindness. There's that mutual hospitality. For because of the rain that had set in, and because of the cold, they kindled a fire and received us all. This word native is just a lousy translation, and the literal word is barbarian. When I read native in English, all I think is a bunch of people with bones through their noses and clubs and just coming out of a cave. That's a horrible, horrible view of what this actually is. All that this means is not educated in the Greco-Roman system. What this means is mostly they don't speak Greek. So to a Roman, you're a barbarian. If you don't speak Greek, you're not educated in the Roman system, you're uncouth. You're just, it's a little like Southern California. I have no idea where that just came from. This island of Malta was colonized 1,000 years earlier by the Phoenicians. So they speak Punic or Carthaginian. And the Romans took it over about 200 years before our text this morning. Verse 3. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks, so watch this, what happens. It's raining, so the people say, we got to warm these people off this boat up. So they light a fire, and Paul's sitting there saying, well, I don't want them doing all the work. So Paul jumps up. He's a prisoner. He jumps up and gets a bunch of wood. I'm sure people watched him do it and say, that was really nice of the prisoner. We ought to do that. So it's just really cool, the image that is being painted by Luke here. He gets a bundle of sticks and laid them on a fire, and a viper came out and because of the heat fastened itself on his hand. There's a great start. I mean, if this were me and I'm Paul, I would say, here we go again. This is my whole life, I just want, right? I would be such an Eeyore in this situation, and you never hear this from Paul. Because again, here's another thread that we've been looking at. There's always two ways to live life. When your day happens, there's always two ways to look at any event in your day. It's either, what a bummer, this is so lousy, I didn't deserve this is so unfair, why doesn't this happen to anybody else? There's the victim mindset, or the mindset that says, this is a dark world, and now that I've seen darkness, I will watch even more intently for God. I will watch for the light of the hand of God to pierce through, because really what I should be seeing is nothing but darkness. The fact that I see any light at all in this dark world tells me that God exists and that God is alive. Verse 4. And the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, and they began saying to one another, undoubtedly this man is a murderer, and though he has been saved from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. However, he shook the creature off him into the fire, and he suffered no harm. So a sea voyage was seen in this period of time, particularly in Hellenistic literature, as a time where the gods could bring retribution on the guilty. So if you looked at this sea voyage and they saw Paul and this group, they'd say, somebody on that boat did something wrong to crash the crash. But they lived. Oh, but a snake now fastens itself onto the one guy out of all the boats. He's clearly guilty before the gods. This word is really strange. It says, the text says, he's been saved from the sea, but justice has not allowed him to live. This word justice, it just sounds like justice. Well, he's getting his just desserts, but it's deeper than that. This is the Greek word dike, D-I-K-E. It's actually the virgin goddess of Zeus. And Dike was said to basically watch over the earth to see who had done something wrong. And when they did something wrong, she would go back to her father Zeus and report what that person had done wrong, and then Zeus would bring a snake and bite your hand, or he would crash your boat, or he would do whatever. So when they're saying this, they're actually saying Dike the goddess. Again, this isn't karma, like we would hear it today. When something goes wrong, people say, oh, that's karma. But in a sense, really, that karma word is a godless word. It just means that's how life works. But nobody ever asked the question, but how did karma get here? Because I do believe in karma. It's like gravity. Well, gravity's just woven into the fabric of the DNA of the universe. But how did gravity get here? These people actually believe that there's something behind all this. And so obviously this God is watching Paul. And Paul, which is really funny, gets bit. He just kind of, with their God minding, this is Zeus having a snake bite him into their mind, and he just goes like this. It's just this beautiful picture of, nah, you have no control over me because I follow God. Verse 6. But they were expecting that he would begin to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But after they had waited a long time and had seen nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and began to say that he was a god. Remember, this is the second time that somebody kind of thought Paul, and remember the other time was Paul and Barnabas. I think it was in Lystra. They thought he was a god, and he got really angry. He has no reaction in this story. It doesn't mean he doesn't. It just means, again, Luke doesn't care about telling us any of this. Verse 7. Now in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the leading man of the island, named Publius, who welcomed us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. Most scholars believe that this idea of the leading man, he's a local native, meaning he's a non-Greek speaking local. You remember what the Romans did? We've talked about this throughout Acts. The Romans were smart. They would go conquer a land, and then they would allow one of their rulers to stay in rulership so it felt like their country still. So in Israel, they conquer Israel, and they put the Herod over them. So Herod's a Jewish guy. Herod gets to run Israel, but he's not really running Israel, but it feels like to the Israelites he's running Israel when Rome's thumb is just on top of him. So they take this native islander, a leading man on the island, and they say, you're now in charge. Probably giving him citizenship. And you might recall from last week, there are 276 people on this boat. So when it says these islanders and this native guy, this leading guy, are taking care of them, they're taking 276 people into their homes to be hospitable, feeding them, giving them a place to sleep, letting them bathe off. I mean, this is hospitality. This is not a very big island at all. Verse 8. And it happened that the father of Publius was lying in bed, afflicted. There's that whole idea of chance, I think not thing. With recurrent fever and dysentery. Scholars later named this Malta fever. They didn't know what it was, but now we know it was a small microbe that was actually in goat's milk. So they would ingest the goat's milk, take the microbe in, and get this really bad dysentery and fever. And Paul went in to see him, and after he had prayed, he laid his hands on him and he healed him. After this happened, shockingly, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases were coming to Paul and getting cured. They also honored us with many marks of respect, and when we were setting sail, they supplied us with all that we needed. Again, the hospitality. You can't say enough about this. And it's a two-way hospitality. So they're living their lives, Paul, these Christians, in such a way that the islanders don't feel judged. And the islanders feel free to be reciprocal in this process. Seeing you, Doug, reminds me of the story. So we got our Tuesday group, we have lunch, right? It's a mess of us. It's Derek. He started out to be just Derek and I, right? And really the rest of these freeloaders. Tom Aftal, Doug Abbott, Craig Briscoe, Josh Smith, am I missing anybody? Every now and then Rich really gets hungry and he joins us, but that doesn't happen very often, even less so Matt Lyman. And so we were going to lunch. And as you recall, or as you might know, Jeremy Mann and Marissa, Jeremy's one of our elders here, they adopted this little black girl a year ago. And then the mom had another little boy now, just a couple weeks ago. Now they have both kids, plus their regular, 5 and 7 year olds, if I'm remembering right. So anyway, Doug and Jen, they can't get enough of kids. And so they have become like the little 1-year-old Ari's aunt and uncle, essentially. And so Doug brings, this is a few months ago, I think, so Doug brings Ari to lunch. So here we are, all this group of guys, and Ari. And everywhere we have lunch, and we rotate around because we can't burn this much beauty on just one restaurant. So we move around, and we've just developed these really neat, just really cool reciprocal relationships. Because for us, we're not just going to lunch. For us, we're getting to bond with each other and bless somebody. And so this waitress, there's a waitress, I don't know, what do you think she is? They're 21, 22 years old. We love this girl, and she's just kind of crusty and fun, and she digs us, and we just had neat conversations. She knows we're believers. She sees us pray before our meal. She hears these crazy conversations about our lives and what God is doing. Well, next thing you know, she's got the baby, because Doug's already explained the whole story about, the Mans and how they adopt this. So she's just literally waiting on tables with Ari. Next thing you know, some other waitress walks by with Ari. Ari just being passed around like a loaf of bread. Well, this relationship just keeps going, and every time we go in, how's Ari? What's going on with Ari? So Doug says to her, like a week ago or so, he says, we're going to have Ari for 3 days, because we want to, he didn't say it, but they want to bless the Mans, take pressure off the Mans. So they keep taking Ari to give them a break, because it's just so neat to watch this, just love, 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 love. So she goes, will you bring her in? Doug goes, well, of course. What day do you work? She said, I work Friday. He goes, absolutely. So in walks Doug and Craig Briscoe with Ari, the two firemen with the loaf of bread. Next thing, she's just excited. She took Ari, I'm sure, I wasn't there. She comps their meal. These guys eat all this food, and she says there's no bill. There's no bill whatsoever. So the moral of the story is, so there's a sign-up sheet out back. She's booked for the next 2.5 months, so I would get in there early and get on that sign-up. That sounds silly, but that's the picture in this passage. The picture is Jeremy and Marissa saying, this is what God wants us to do. They want us to take this girl and bless this girl whose mom's addicted to meth. And Doug and Jim can't get enough of kids. And they say, we want to get to know this kid and bless this kid, and we want to take pressure off the Mans. And then he just brings Ari to lunch, and we're all just loving each other. And she's seen our love for each other, and she's infectious, so her guard goes down. Next thing you know, she's paying for their lunch. This is what our life should look like. This is exactly what our life should look like. Verse 11. At the end of the 3 months, Luke just slips that in like it's nothing, we set sail on an Alexandrian ship, which had wintered at the island and which had the twin brothers for its figurehead. So the text says they get on an Alexandrian ship. This again is an Egyptian grain ship that's been parked on the island because it can't go anywhere, because it's the wrong time to sail. And it says there are these two deities, Castor and Pollux. These deities are actually wooden images carved onto the boat. And these were also sons of Zeus, and they were supposed to be the protectors for sailors. And it's amusing to me in both accounts. First of all, if these gods are so powerful, why is the boat tucked into Malta hiding all winter? If they've got these two great gods that are supposed to protect them, they don't want to move. The other thing that's amusing to me is Paul gets on this pagan boat with these pagan gods and has no trouble with it. It's a little bit like me walking on the walk the other day. Remember, the guy hands me this just satanic chanting card, and I'm feeling all like, oh, I should have put it in my pocket. And then the thought hit me, you're so stupid, Doug. It's a stupid piece of paper. And you have the resurrected Jesus dwelling in your soul, and you're worried about a card in your pocket? And I handed it back, but at that point it wasn't because the card had magic, because I just didn't want it. Here, go ahead and take it back as a gesture to him. It was my way of also verbally being able to tell him, I couldn't be more satisfied with my relationship with God. I do not need your card. Verse 12, after we put in at Syracuse, we stayed there for 3 days. I'm going to make sure I didn't stay there. No. And I read the first one. See, I'm doing this all over again, people. They went into Syracuse, and then that's about 90 miles away, by the way. And from there we sailed around and arrived at Rhegium. That's about 90 miles away, or 70 miles away. The first one's 90, the second one's 70. And it says the south wind sprang up, which is exactly what they would need to sail up the western coast of Italy. And on the second day, we came to Puteoli, which is about 170 miles. So they're now literally on the mainland, finally, of Italy. And most people at this point would take the road. And there we found some brethren, that means followers of Jesus, and were invited to stay with them for 7 days, and thus we came to Rome. So this is fascinating too. Normally, these soldiers and these prisoners, the centurion would just go on hikes for 20 miles at a time, and then he would just requisition houses to stick people in, and he had no say over whatsoever. But they don't get a chance to do that. Why? Because believers can't wait to see them, so they rush down to the coast of Puteoli, and they say, we got you covered. And they now take them in to their houses to take care of them. And this road to Puteoli was really flinty and rocky and a horrible kind of way to travel, and it's a long way, as I mentioned. And so having a nice week off would be great, but it's also would be a nice break, but it's just fascinating. You just get shipwrecked, sink in the sea, you finally sail another several hundred miles, and now you got to walk this road for a couple hundred miles up to Rome. I mean, again, it reminds me, Jeb Clipness and I, we hunted in New Mexico a year and a half ago. And it was a horse packing trip. And every day we'd get up at 4 in the morning, and 5 I'd be on a horse in the pitch dark. We'd ride this horse for 3 hours, sometimes 4. And all you're thinking the whole time is just, I cannot wait to get off this horse. And then you get off the horse and you hike for 8, 10 miles, and the whole time you're hiking, all you're thinking is, I cannot wait to see that horse. And so all you're thinking is, wherever you were, this is horrible, I want the other one, which may be running through Paul's mind. I want to be on the boat, I want to be off this road, I want to be on this road, I want to be off this boat. Verse 15, and the brethren, when they heard about us, came from there as far as the market of Appius. This is about 43 miles south of Rome. You can still see the ruins there today. And then we made it to the Three Inns, which is a series of shops about 33 miles south of Rome. And they came to meet us. And when Paul saw them, he thanked God, and it encouraged him greatly. Again, so cool to see what is taking place here. The anticipation, the love. They can't wait to see Paul. He meets them. He finds out they're following Jesus. He gets all excited, which again reminds me of another thread that we talked about way back in chapter 2, this idea of what an actual healthy church looks like. Do you remember this discussion? Luke gave us these 4 marks of what the early church in Acts 2 looked like. The first mark was they were devoted to learning the story of God. It says, the text said they were devoted to the apostles' teaching, which is exactly why we're doing this right now. The second thing it said about this church is they devoted themselves deeply to each other. It means they had, it's this koinonia word, it means they had this feeling of heavy responsibility for each other. It's what we just saw in Bev the last month and a half. Bev, actually, not many of you knew Bev, I don't think, or knew her that well. You knew her face, you probably said hi to her, but wouldn't you agree, didn't know Bev deeply? I mean, I've learned so much about Bev in the last 6 weeks I never knew. And then all of a sudden she gets thrown in the hospital, and they're having to tell people in email too many visitors from the church. And Greg Armstrong just goes into complete pastoral mode, and he's just there all the time. He's encouraging her. He's praying for her. Andy Lawrence, Mr. Hospital Visitation, and nobody here hardly knows it. If he finds out somebody's in the hospital, he doesn't even know you, huh, Patsy?
He just shows.
He just shows. And then when he shows, what's he like?
We go walking.
We go walking.
Crazy things, like we're illegitimate things.
That's our Andy. And he doesn't want anybody to know it. Right? And then she gets out of the hospital, and this nut sleeps overnight with her, and so does Val for a couple nights. And then Greg's back over, hanging the chandelier. And this is what the church looks like when it's deeply devoted and has responsibility for each other. We were in Santa Cruz over the weekend, and Lynn and I rode our little cruiser bikes down and had some Thai food. We ran into a couple, some Christians that we very didn't know very well. And they're going through just a heartache. And so we got to know them very quickly on the sidewalk. And I said, who's walking this? And they go to a church in the area, by the way. Who's going through this with you? And they both looked at me and said, nobody. Exactly, right. I didn't know what to say. They used to go here, by the way. Nobody. I had a pit in my stomach last night. Just a pit in my stomach. That's not the picture that we're seeing here. The third thing they did was they regularly took meals together. And really, I do want to challenge you by this question. Since we looked at this 6 months ago, how are you doing in this area? Look around this room and ask yourself, how many of these people have been to your house for dinner? That's literally what this means. It's one of the 4 great marks of the early church, eating together. Nothing binds you. You have one meal with another human being over a couple hours, you're knit. Which is why I constantly kind of, I saw Bill, and I could just feel this, just like Bill and Chris. It's like, I really want to have a meal with these guys. We've had coffee together, that's not enough. So in 2 weeks, we're having abalone together with the Lawrences. I cannot wait, because I just want to hang out with them. And that's what this means. And the fourth mark was they prayed. They just prayed for each other constantly. And these marks are what we're seeing with these people. They've heard Paul. Paul wrote to them 3 years earlier. They know Paul's been going through a hard time. They know he still has to go before Caesar himself. It's breaking their heart. But they're not trying to stop him. They're not trying to say, we'll sneak you out in the middle of the night. They're empathizing with him. They're not sympathizing, they're empathizing with him. They just want to be connected. And Paul and Luke and Aristarchus are doing the same thing back. And as Palm Sunday feels, this isn't like a sort of triumphal entry for Paul. He's going to Rome to go before Caesar. They're just throwing down the proverbial branches before Paul as he comes in. The rest of the text in Acts 28 will close with 3 little scenes, and they're all in Paul's private quarters. We'll just look at the last one in a little bit of remaining time we have this morning. This Jewish group that comes to meet with him. Verse 16. And when we entered Rome, there's Luke again writing. This is the last time you'll hear this, but realize we're at the very end of the book. So this gives us the impression that Luke was next to Paul through this whole thing. We also know from the letter that Paul wrote to the Colossians, as well as the letter of Philemon, that Luke never left Paul. So the whole time he's waiting for this trial before Caesar, Luke is sitting there with him. This is a brother. This is a guy that says, I love you, and I'm going to stick next to you. It's interesting. Paul gets all the fanfare in this, but Luke is a hidden hero in this whole scene. And they clearly don't think Paul's a big threat. They're letting him live in his own quarters. He should be in a military camp or a prison, but he's not. And the text basically says that he is chained to this guard. When we entered Rome, Paul was allowed to stay by himself with the soldier who was guarding him. So this is just a common guard. They would chain by the wrist. He would be chained to the wrist for a series of hours, and then they would rotate. And we all know what Paul is like. There's no way Paul's going to be chained to the wrist of somebody without saying, tell me about your life. Let's get to know one another. We see this when Paul writes to the Philippians in chapter 1. Now I want you to know, brethren, he says, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel, so that my imprisonment in the cause of Messiah has become well known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard and to everyone else. Again, Paul would never say, I had a bad day. Paul would never say, my life is terrible. What Paul would say is, I'm going through something really rough, and I know God will show up. I'm chained to a Roman guard, and I don't deserve any of this. Now what will God do? Well, the guy can't move. Let's have a conversation, is Paul's mind. Which again is another thread we've looked at. Every journey to Paul was a missionary journey. No matter where Paul went, every day had eternal significance. Whenever we wake up and say, I wish this day was not here. I wish that I could just get past this. I shared with you briefly a few weeks ago, and it was interesting. Brian said, I never talk about the company we run really. I don't know why it just doesn't really come into my head much. I don't associate myself as that. But we had this big meeting with Kaiser, and it was a big, big deal. I mean, they were going to take away a third of our contract. And we have 60 employees, and we have people at church that work with us, and it was a big deal. Brian and I and Josh and Jeremy, all good that go here, we all went to this meeting. All we were praying was, God, we of course want you to extend the contract of this one thing, but here's what we really want. We just want to know when we walked out of this meeting, you were there. That's what we want. And that's the mindset of Paul. I'm chained to this guy. I choose not to see the chain as the end of the end, but the chain is leading me to somewhere. Oh, it's leading me to a guy's heart. Now I can get behind this. There's eternal significance to it. You know what's funny about our meeting? Because so many of you have prayed, so many emails. I cannot thank you enough for that. You know, Mike, just so many of you are just so encouraging. I just had somebody ask me this morning again about it. We talked about the thing that we went there for what, 6 minutes, Brian? Could have been longer than 6 minutes. They didn't even want to talk about it. The whole time, all they wanted to talk about was all the other projects they wanted to bless us with. They kept saying over and over to us, we want to make sure that you're making enough money. We got in the car, and Brian and I looked at each other, and we were just kind of numb. We were numb he called me that night. We don't usually call about work. We were numb. Because you just kept saying, only God could do this. And by the way, we never got even a remote answer on the one thing we went there for. But God kept saying, I'll take care of it. Right? Your day is eternal. Your day is not about running a cancer company, Doug and Ryan and Josh and Jeremy. Your day is eternal. Your day is about what I will do with the circumstances of life. If you're chained to a guard, watch me work. And that's exactly what Paul is like. Verse 17. After 3 days, Paul called together those who were the leading men of the Jews. And when they came together, he began saying to them, Brethren, though I had done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers, so he's now explaining what has happened to him. Yet I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans. And when they examined me, they were willing to release me because there was no ground for putting me to death. A couple of quick observations. First of all, after 3 days, Paul gets to Rome, and in 3 days, that's all it takes. He says, all right, God, let's get going. We got stuff to do. We got people to meet. Let's get some Jews coming to meet with us. And that's the second observation. He immediately goes right back to what he normally does. He meets with the Jews first before he meets with the Gentiles. And just as a little bit of a history lesson, and we're going to really see this when we start studying Romans together in the second week of July, there are a bunch of Christian churches made up of Jews and Gentiles all over Rome. And we know the gospel had already gotten there because in chapter 2 of Acts, when the 120 people were in the upper room and the Spirit of God went on them, they came out and they were speaking all these languages of all these diaspora Jews that had come in that spoke different languages, and each one speaking their language. It says there were Jews from Rome that were in the city for that festival. So we know they heard the gospel. They know they heard about Jesus as the Messiah. They went back to Rome. So there's a bunch of these Jews that are following Jesus and a bunch not. There's estimates of somewhere between 20 and 50,000 Jews in Rome at this time. And almost all of them were on the kind of medium to poor side, by the way. And there were estimates of 11 different synagogues in the city at this time. And so Paul asked some of these leading men of these synagogues to come meet with them. These are not Jewish Jesus followers, by the way, and he wants to get at it immediately. And the text says in verse 17 that he was delivered over. That's what Paul says. I was delivered over to the Romans. It's the exact same Greek word that was used of Jesus when he was handed over to the Romans to be killed on a cross. Paul is not using, or excuse me, Luke is not using this language with Paul, and Paul is not using this language on accident. Again, this is a thread we've looked at over and over too. Paul's life parallels the life of Jesus. And if we have the Spirit of Jesus in us, if we have said to God, I give up, I'll follow you, come into me. If we have done that in one moment of time, then our life will mimic the life of Jesus, whether you want it or not. I mean, we're sing this song, Take Me to the Cross. We're going to sing that as we take communion today. That doesn't just mean take me to the cross and then give me your forgiveness. That means take me to the cross. I want to walk the walk of Jesus. And if it takes me being chained to another soldier, I'll do it if it's for his betterment. I want to bless people by you, God, even if it requires suffering. This is the walk of Jesus. So don't be shocked when it takes place. Verse 19. And when the Jews, so Paul is explaining what happened to him. When the Jews, these are the Sanhedrin Jews, not just all the Jews, when they objected, I was forced to appeal to Caesar. Not that I had any accusation against my nation. For this reason, therefore, I requested to see you and to speak with you, for I am wearing this chain for the sake of the hope of Israel. Again, he's not a victim. I'm wearing this because I followed God. And I'm wearing it for the hope of Israel. This is Paul's main point. So what is the hope of Israel? The hope of Israel is that this God, specifically Jesus in the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, Jesus in the Trinity, was the one in Genesis that breathed creation into being. I'll let you decide how he breathed it, but he breathed creation into being, which means when it goes south, as the creator, he's the only one that has the right to put it back. So that other word is judge. And we hear the word judge, we hear negative. But judge is actually a positive thing because it's God, specifically Jesus, wanting to put things back the way they were and even better. It's a new creation. It's something Derek's talking about all the time upstairs in the book of Revelation. It's the creation of a new world. It's putting life back together again. Verse 21, and we'll close with this last thread. And they said to him, we have neither received letters from Judea concerning you, nor have any of the brethren come here and reported or spoken anything bad about you. This is weird. But we really desire to hear from you what your views are. For concerning this sect, meaning Jesus, it is known to us that it is spoken against everyone. We've heard about Jesus. We don't get Jesus. Will you speak more to us? And I want to close with just this last thread. And it's the one we've hit more than any other in this whole book of Acts. Next week we'll do more of a review of Paul's life. But it's this thumbprint idea. It's, man, if we go through this book and we have not picked this up, I'll be so brokenhearted. That we're to look for the thumbprint of God always in our day. And this is what Paul's like. You read these verses, they don't look like much. But realize what took place. Everywhere in the diaspora, they have news about Paul, they have news about the sect. They've heard of this sect with Jesus. It's not negative to them. And more importantly, they are not negative on Paul. You recall in the story, people traveled from all over the diaspora, these dispersed areas, to come hunt Paul down in Israel. And yet these people have no negativity in Paul. The same storm that annihilated Paul's boat on the island of Malta has literally stopped all communication from getting to where Paul was in Rome. The same storm that the forces of life rear against Paul to keep him from getting to Rome are the same forces God says, no problem, it's just a little wind, I can move that around. I'll just put my thumb on that. And I will stop any negative letters from reaching Rome so that when you get there, Paul, and the leading Jews come to meet with you, they'll have an open mind. See, it's all, again, how we look at life. Do we have eyes to see, and do we have ears to hear the resurrected one breathing life? Or are we so focused on what went wrong, what didn't go according to our expectation, that we shut our eyes, we put our head down, and we no longer can see what God is imprinting in us? Let's pray. Jesus, on this significant day, this day where you entered Jerusalem, riding on a colt, announcing your kingship, we gladly bow our knee to you. We know you're good. We know you're benevolent. We know you pursue us, even when we run. We love you deeply, and we realize that our love for you is just a responsive love. It's a love that says, thank you for reaching me. Thank you for coming after me. Our love is a thank you to you, not something we generated ourselves. We acknowledge you as the great initiator of our life. And we gladly worship you. We gladly want to follow you. And we as a church will commit, I pray, to keep our eyes open and our ears open as we willingly walk the life of your cross out. Partnering with you in any way you see fit to overturn darkness in this brutal world. We pray this in the name of our King and our Messiah, Jesus.